What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 52 of the Book Binge, where this week we are talking about Demon in White by Christopher Ruocchio, the third full-length novel entry in the Sun Eater. The simplest way that I think that I can really begin this video talking about this book is that for somebody who's not like super experienced or familiar with sci-fi, Sun Eater is pretty much the perfect point of entry for anybody who's looking to get into it for really any form of ease. It's really fun. It's really good. The quality of the bar of quality, I should say, is incredibly high, and Demon in White only further solidifies that fact. Further that I get into the series, the more excited that I get about continuing it in a sort of backwards way, since I'm also fearful for all further entries because of the pain that Ruocchio knows how to cause. Seriously, everything about the series is amazing so far. I cannot wait to continue and be hurt by it even more, but I don't have a whole lot to say in introduction to this video because I just want to get right into the good of Demon in White. Demon in White is the same level of incredible that Howling Dark was, and though it's in completely different ways, the bar of quality that Ruocchio has set with these two books is insane. I mean, Empire of Silence, like I said, was already itself pretty good, but doesn't match the highs of Howling Dark and Demon in White. These two books have been amazing. But what are some of the specific things about Demon in White that I think make it good compared to, say, Howling Dark? And you can watch my review on Howling Dark if you would like to know more about that in terms of what I love and appreciate about that book. In Demon in White, I think it goes in a slightly different direction for the most part, in that Demon in White deals a lot with politics in ways that neither of the first two books did. Even Empire of Silence had bits and pieces of political maneuvering and stuff like that going on in different ways, but nothing quite like what Demon in White does, especially in the first couple acts, because Act 1 has plenty of it before its climax, and then Act 2 has plenty of it following the climax of the first act. Um, Beyond just the politics as well, you can't forget the combat stuff that Ruocchio is incredibly good at writing. This book has more than one combat climax. Yes, the plural, two combat climaxes are they're unbelievably engaging. They're super exciting and really good. There's the first and the third act which both end with these fantastic combat encounters that are written super amazingly and are so high stakes because you don't know what Ruocchio is going to do with them, and they're mind blowing. And speaking of mind blowing, Demon in White also does some of the lore and universe building stuff that I've complimented about the last two books to a degree even beyond what those did. Because Howling Dark gives Empire of Silence like plants a little seed of some certain lore and universe building stuff. And then Howling Dark builds on that and grows into a little sapling. But then in Demon in White, some of those things become full on trees, but not just trees, like they become an entire forest. The amount of lore drops and stuff like that in this book was incredibly mind blowing. I cannot believe that Ruocchio did some of these things so unbelievably well, especially since at the end of Howling Dark, there is a specific question about a specific element of the universe that left me personally questioning, like, how in the world is Ruocchio planning to write this so that it doesn't feel weird or completely unbelievable? In Demon in White, I mean, when he expands on those things, they're still unbelievable to an extent, but Ruocchio still manages to write them in a way that makes them just comprehensible enough that I can go along with them wholeheartedly without thinking that they're dumb or, you know, overly, what's the word that I'm thinking of? Just overly unbelievable, I guess. Like, they're right on that perfect sweet spot on that scale that I really, really, really liked. Like, brain explosions the whole way around. That stuff all happened in the second act, and my goodness, incredible. All three of these acts had their own separate climaxes, and although Act 2 did not have a combat related one, it had something very different that went along with this lore and universe building that is just absolutely insane. Um, I was not expecting it to break my brain the way that it did. And I think part of my experience with Demon and White was also enhanced a little bit by the fact that I read Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 1 before I read Demon and White. Obviously, not something that you have to do, but there are a couple stories in Tales Volume 1, notably being the Demons of Ere and the Night Captain. I believe there might be one more story in that collection that is made reference or referred to in this book. I cannot remember for sure, but at least those two are that made sections and references and stuff even more impactful than they otherwise would have been because something that happened in between Empire of Silence and Howling Dark was that Howling Dark, there's a time gap, and Howling Dark references some things that happen in between those two books that we haven't seen on paper yet, and who knows, maybe some of those things we will never see on the page that are just like, okay, well, there's some of these interesting pieces of Hadrian's history that he hasn't talked about yet. Maybe we'll see that, maybe we won't. But Demon and White uses plenty of those same things because there is another time gap and it does reference some other things that happen in between Howling Dark and Demon and White. But a couple of those things did occur in some of the short stories, which I thought was really cool idea because then you can be like, the whole Leonardo DiCaprio gif of him pointing at the screen, just the, hey, I know that. But there was just a lot to love in Demon and White, and especially like in regards to the combat climaxes again, the third act and the end of this book, like that final chapter, multiple chef's kisses, such a good final chapter, incredible. The only reason why I can in any way, shape, or form personally justify this being straight up better than Howling Dark rather than being, on equal footing is because of this last chapter, which is just insane. It is so crazy, and there's really nothing more that I can say about all of those things without me actually going into spoiler territory, which is not something that I tend to do. But let's talk about some of the one element that I think is not as flawless, I'll say, as the rest of the book. Just it's not something that I dislike about it. It's not something that is legitimately bad, but the only thing that I feel like I can count against Demon and White is just the way that it's formatted in terms of the pacing. I've mentioned the three separate acts multiple points. It is because Demon and White feels like three shorter books, so say something around 90 to 100,000 words each wrapped up into one binding. So rather than being one entire volume of a book, the way that Howling Dark felt to me, because it felt like one story with its separate arcs, but it was all doing one thing to such a heavy degree that it felt like one story. Demon and White has three very distinct arcs, so it still has the overarching plot that's kind of coursing through the whole story, but even that is split up a tiny bit into what's about to come in the next couple books. The way that Demon and White felt to me was more like three shorter novels packed up into one binding, and it could easily be read and honestly, and to a certain degree, easily have been published as three separate books without it really feeling super off, Like, those three arcs were definitely wrapped up in ways that could have justified doing that, even if the second act of Demon and White was maybe would have been a little bit too slow paced to justify that. It's just the way that it was formatted feels like three distinct pieces of a book within a book rather than one entire large story the way that I loved Howling Dark for being. That's not to say that that's a bad thing per se. Plenty of people love Demon and White more than Howling Dark, and I can totally see why because it is just as good. Like, without a doubt, it is just as good. But to me, I think I preferred the slightly more constant narrative of Howling Dark and the way that that was structured a little bit over the distinct stopping spots that Demon and White kind of sort of has throughout. But, that's just a matter of personal preference. Like I said, not a bad thing, just something that I think is worth noting as maybe the only element of the book that I think I actively didn't love as much as the rest, I'll say. And in terms of the ugly, Christopher, why must you give me brain bleed? Every single book at this point just gives me brain bleed. The The climax to Empire of Silence at the time felt insane and did some really crazy things, but boy oh boy was I not ready for some of the things that would happen in these next two books. Like I said in the Howling Dark review, I believe, I basically call Howling Dark the aneurysm, the book, because I had no less than 3 of them while reading that story. I probably had a similar experience throughout Demon in White with multiple similar occurrences, because holy cow, it was insane. Some of the stuff that happens, mind-boggling, brain-blowing stuff at really the end of each of the 3 acts had really absurd and insane things that I just absolutely love it for, but crazy. My recommendation is to absolutely read this series in case my reviews up to this point haven't been enough reason to justify at least scooting them up the TBR a little bit. I shouldn't need to put any more words to this, but these books make the series completely worth reading. Because even though Empire of Silence technically spoils the end of the series in like the first chapter, you never know where the story itself is going next. From the beginning of the book to the end of the book, everything in between is completely unknown. Even if you know where it ends and you know where it starts, nothing in between is predictable. Ruocchio does that so well. It keeps me on the edge of my seat every single page while I'm reading any of these, and I cannot wait to continue to experience that as I move on. It is absolutely worth the read. Because Demon in White is incredible just as Howling Dark was, and I have no reason to believe that Kingdoms of Death will be any less quality. So, bring on the pain, Christopher. Bring it on. In the meantime, if you want pain from a extremely mid-quality novella that I wrote, it'll be finished publishing on seasonalproductions.com this Friday. It's called Beneath Perfection. I'm actually incredibly proud of that. So if you're interested in reading something that maybe isn't nearly as good as Christopher Ruocchio, because really who can be as good as Christopher Ruocchio besides a few of the top, consider checking that out and giving some feedback. It's completely free to read online, so I would greatly appreciate any feedback on that if you feel like reading it. Otherwise, I will be back again this Thursday, I believe, for part 1 of my 2022 reading tier list video, covering some of the books that I read in 2022 and putting them into a tier list format. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I'm excited for all of that. I'm also excited for the review that will be coming out next Tuesday as well, which is another one related to Christopher Ruocchio. So if you're excited for all of that, a little bit more Sun Eater content this month, be sure to subscribe and come back then. Thank you guys for watching. I'll be back again on Thursday.